computer. Okay.
Rab,
Hi, Isaac.
Rabbi, good morning. It's so great to see you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Happy
So
Hanukkah.
thank you. Back at you. So we are finishing the Centurion servants
We're
today.
almost, we can, but yeah, 8:13. Yeah, we've been moving at a very good pace.
Yeah. This is our I think our fifth discussion on the Centurion servants. So lots of great discussions, lots of great content. And I feel that if we wanted to, we could probably spend even more time on it, but we'll bid it adieu today.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 8, verse 13. And to the centurion, Jesus said, Go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment.
Okay. Are you surprised he was healed, Isaac?
Well, I'm not surprised he's healed. Again, that's what's to be expected. I think what I would love, right? So this word believed, right? He says like go and it's done for you as you have believed. And earlier we've discussed on conduct, on how the focus on Matthew is on doing good works, on doing certain things. And here I think the word believe that he probably uses multiple senses in two different ways, as in anyway, I would love for you to expand on this because this can also seem like very Pauline. You just believe something, think can happen. But I think in the Gospel of Matthew, the word belief it has its own it has multiple different nuances. So I would love for you to expand on it. But I love the way it starts. Go, as in he speaks with a certain type of authority, and it seems in so direct contrast to the earlier verse on weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Yes. Absolutely. So one question that we have is what you would call you said you called it Pauline Christianity, that you believe something and it is. So I don't know what form of Christianity that is, but I would say that there is some sense that there is a connection between the spiritual and physical world that
Hmm.
is being manifest in this verse. That's saying that if you believe something, there's some reality to it. So, if anything, we might question why I can't just think of a cake and let that cake appear if I really, really believe. Maybe the Pope, who we hope believes in Christianity at a high level, how come he can't just make things manifest by believing? How come he
So
can't just heal by
yeah,
believing? Yeah.
this is where I think so. This is my earlier question, right? So belief on the face of it, belief might just seem as a cognitive aspect where you believe something in your mind and things can happen. But I get the impression just seeing how these verses play out, where when the centurion came, he knelt down, he said, Lord. And so I think there's much more to believe than just at least the version of just thinking something up in the head and having that come to reality. I know. Um, or do you see, or how do you connect this with his conduct of kneeling down, of saying, literally praying to him, if you want, you can make me heal. Like in the sense that I get the impression that in this context, belief wasn't just he believing something, he wasn't just thinking something, but he did some things which then showed that he believed in certain things.
What did you do?
Well, so if you look at verse 5, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him. Appealing means literally begging him, right? With the verse 5, as in, please help me. My servant is not feeling well. He calls him Lord. And then as we discussed, he's a centurion, he's not Jewish. And so to call somebody to call him Lord meant he also had some belief, like he believed in him, that he saw him in a different way. So to me, all that are works of conduct, which is which
So your acts of conduct are coming to him and saying, Lord, these are the worst acts of conduct I've ever heard. If you told me he gave charity, act of conduct. If you told me that he built a synagogue, as he did in Luke, act of conduct. But coming, appealing, and saying, Lord, I would not call that personally acts of conduct.
But isn't that what the gospel, the earlier verses were all based about, where Jesus was his focus was you're either team Jesus, or outside of team Jesus, there's no middle ground. And if you're in team Jesus, you have to believe in me as Lord, as in
Okay, but
you
the way
have to acknowledge me.
you just used the word belief in Team Jesus. So that was I feel that you were trying to negate that word right now and not make your argument contingent upon the word belief, but you're back to belief.
So
And
okay,
believing King Jesus. Yeah.
yeah, belief as it's not just mentally affirming, but also doing things which reflect that mental belief,
It
right?
just
So
doesn't, I mean, it's just not here though. I mean, I feel that when you read this, there aren't actions. And let me further this point a little more. When we compare to the synoptic parallel of Luke, which I think is really interesting. I actually want to talk about this for a little bit today, do some parallels today.
yeah.
But Luke, the centurion, doesn't even meet Jesus.
Hmm.
If you look close at Luke 7:10, sorry, 7:2, the centurion there had a slave whom he valued highly and who was ill. When he heard about Jesus, the centurion in Luke 7:3, he sent some Jewish elders. Your minimum act of worship does he, and not only that, the Jesus speaks to the crowds, speaks to the elders, um, gives the centurion gives the whole speech to the elders. If you look in 7:6, and Jesus went with them, but when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to say to him. And I want to point out in Luke, the main point is that Jesus does not talk to the centurion. There's such
Hmm.
heavy focus that Jesus and the centurion do not interact. You might say someone didn't like non-Jews, but I think more importantly, that Jesus' magical powers, Jesus' miraculous powers, take place without interaction, which is a higher level of magic. If
Yeah.
anything, I think the reason that they don't interact is because this story is so important to know that Jesus doesn't even got to be there. He can do anything. And in the end of the story, it says, Jesus heard all this. He turns to the crowd and that followed him. He speaks to the crowd. And then in the story, when those that had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. The centurion is actively omitted from the story throughout Luke, as opposed to what happens in Matthew.
That is. Yeah, well, that's again, thank you for delineating those differences. This reminds me of a conversation on Abraham. We discussed where Abraham interceded in certain places, but he did not intercede for others. He did not intercede for Isaac. He did not intercede when God came up, when God said, your folks will be slaves in Egypt. But he interceded when God prayed, when God said something about Lot. And so I'm curious, right? So when you look at the centurion, as in that in Luke, there's no mention of him. He comes, or there is no direct connection between him and
Yeah,
Jesus.
there's a ton of mention. There's
Yeah,
no direct interaction.
no direct interaction. Um, how do you think their thoughts on intercession, or him? Just wondering how you think about it, as in um, you know, how people's folks thoughts on intercession or somebody speaking up for them could have shaped some of those. Now we also highlighted that when Matthew was written, anti-Semitism was at its highest, and so this seems so bizarre that the author of Matthew would place the story right here up front and center. Um, do
Okay.
you see, so do you see any parallels or do you see connections, or do things stand out to you? Because in one gospel, there's no direct contact between Jesus and the centurion. And the other one, it seems so close together, which could mean that maybe they're not the same, maybe things were changed a bit, or maybe they could have been two, again, just thinking out loud, maybe two different aspects of it. But how do you think of this given, or maybe I'm rambling. I'll let
Okay.
you speak, and I've spoken quite a bit.
So there's a lot of interesting things that are happening in this verse. One of the most interesting things is what you just discussed. I think we need to discuss what it means to have a belief and it comes into action in the world. So I think this is one of the things that you're kind of trying to articulate, that how do we understand this idea? Because on the one hand, you tried to give a apologist answer saying he wasn't really just thinking. It wasn't a cognitive
Yeah.
process. It wasn't an intellectual or spiritual or metaphysical or soul-like process. It was his actions that represented his
Yeah.
soul,
Yes.
and therefore magic takes place. So all you're doing is making it one step removed. The magic is not in the brain or in the cognition, but the magic is in the action. So there's no reason that's better. So it's okay if magic be in cognition. It's okay if magic be in action. And it's not better one or the other. Magic is magic. If magic appears anywhere, it's impressive, it's amazing, it's miraculous if it's real, not just sleight of hand. So I'm okay with saying if you're a believer, Matthew wants you to know that magic takes place, that miracles take place, that God intervenes for you. So I don't personally need acts of worship, as you would say. And I think that this is what this is trying to say. So how can that work out? So I was trying to think to a parallel in Jewish tradition philosophically, and I couldn't think of really
So,
one. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Rabbi, so I love the way you described it, right? As in the magic, it's not, it's so, again, so could you help me understand why is the magic in conduct and not any different than magic in just thinking? Because I would think that, the conduct matters more than just cognitive thinking, but you're saying that it doesn't matter, both are the same. Could you help me understand, like, what do you
Well,
mean?
tell me why it's different. I don't see why it'd be different.
I think conduct has more value than just cognitive thinking because conduct is you go do things.
What a physical being you are. Go talk to an angel for a second and see if they agree with you. You're speaking with a bias towards your physical limitations, Isaac.
No, but
What if you're a handicapped person lying in bed with no ability to move whatsoever? Can that person not worship God at whatever high level that you're imagining? Do you not understand like that? Can the handicapped community not really worship?
yeah, Rabbi, okay. That's one case. Generally speaking,
But
generally speaking,
let's sidebar the handicapped community is what I'm hearing from you, Isaac.
that's not what I mean. Okay, I have to think about it. But generally speaking, I would think conduct, right? It's not just your words, but how we live your lives and what we do. And one, I think that values more than just thinking. But
I would
but
start
you're
by
saying,
saying that
but you're
that's
saying,
bias.
but you're saying they both are the same, and I find that
I'm not saying they're both the same. I'm saying that in Aragon, the old magic works according to words. And in Aragon, the old magic works according to something in their fingers.
I see.
There's
Okay.
different ways that the magic could work. And to think that the magic could only work one way is difficult to hear. If anything, one of the things that we pointed out earlier is that Jesus was taught a lesson here both in Luke and in Matthew by the centurion about the way that the magic works. Jesus thought originally that he had to have some direct connection, and the centurion was trying to teach Jesus that it's important for him to understand he is an authority. He is someone who has power, and he can do things from afar. He can act in ways that the commoner cannot. I mean, there's different messages you could pull out of it, but that's definitely one of them. Go and he goes to another. Come and he comes. Do this and a slave does it. Very strong language. And one thing is so cute, which I really love. This shows up in not only it shows up in Matthew and Luke, it even shows up in Mark. Sorry, it shows up even in John in the healing of the royal official son in John 4:46 to 4:54, which is probably an additional parallel, which we'll talk about in a second, where it says go. In John says, unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told them, you'll never believe. The royal office official said, sir, come down before my child dies. Go, Jesus replies, your son will live. Over here, Jesus says in Matthew, our verse 8:13, go, let it be done for you according to your faith. And also, um, we see that, oh, sorry, I don't think it does not take place in Luke. So what's interesting about what's happening in Matthew is that the centurion says in his teaching moment to Jesus, you say go and it happens. And what does Jesus say? Go.
Um,
It's actually Jesus quotes the guy. Jesus is saying, do that. And I think in John, what is it? It also go. And the term go has obviously it's such a broad phrase, it's hard for us to find parallels. But the idea of Lech Lecha, where Abraham is told, you shall go and to leave your father's house, leave your birthplace. The idea of go is to leave your current conception of where you are and be there. to the other place where you are not right now. So it's so amazing when we see the centurion. It's not only go in a literal sense that you leave, it's also go, you can't be here anymore. And this conception of go being a metaphor throughout the Bible shows up, and it also shows up in Talmudic writings that you have to go and see how things are. It's not where you are right now. Going implies a locomotion of self, but locomotion also of being. So he says go, because if you think about this verse, it could have said, and to the centurion Jesus said, let it be done according to your faith. But he literally cites him to show it's almost like a perfect story that the beginning of the story goes and it closes out the story. And that's why, if anything, where we see in John where it says go, your son will live, it's probably a reflection of this. And I just want to, if it's okay, I just want to give a 2-minute sidebar. We don't talk about like academic New Testament so often, but this is really interesting. This one case, because in general, we think that there's a Markian precedent that the Mark was first, and then Matthew, and then Luke. But in this situation, we have a very uncommon situation where we have Matthew has a story, Luke has a very similar story, John has 50% of a story, but Mark doesn't have it at all. So whenever we see that Luke and Matthew have a story, what do we say? Oh, that's the Q text. That generally they take it from Mark, but when Matthew and Luke have a shared text, it's Q. But generally, what most scholars think about the Q text is that it's just statements. It's more like the Beatitudes. It's things that are listed as teachings that Jesus would have said orally or in person. This over here is the one example in the whole New Testament where we have a story that doesn't have a Markian precedent,
Hmm.
Markian party, and it has a parallel in Matthew and Luke that is not just a statement. So this one case is almost either our refutation of the Q perspective, or maybe the actual support of it, and except that there's one narrative. So I think it's very interesting to see that this is a very special story, that it has all these special elements. So now going back to the philosophy after that little sidebar. So you want to know how does these miraculous, how does it, what's the, I'll put it in engineers terms, right? What are the mechanisms that allow these things to take place that we could pinpoint that this is how this is working,
Yeah.
which is why I think you're right. So I tried to think of a,
Rabbi, that, and also could you expand on go, because it sounds like you're saying go as it's not just being physical, but also go metaphysically, or go someplace, or you cannot be where you are, go someplace. Anyway, could you expand on go?
oh, so we could do that first. So again, it's just one of the most famous goes. There's many goes in the Bible, but one of the most famous is the one by specifically Abraham. Abraham, when he sent on his mission to leave, his original birthplace and to go to the land of Canaan, the very famous phrase is "Lech lecha," go for yourself, go, you go. So this, and the verse continues, you go and leave your birthplace, your home place, your family, leave everything you know, and go to this place that I will show you. So there's just so many commentaries who point out that go doesn't mean walk. Go doesn't mean leave. Go means to reject the notions that you had in your past and to kind of be open to a new truth. So that's kind of
So
like the connotation
how
of
does
go.
that how does that apply over here? Like what
Oh, so
notions
listen,
what
listen.
notions
I'm
specifically?
just noticing. I'm just noting that I think even before we said that, just to point out that Jesus is citing the centurion and say go, that would be enough. If we stop there, I would say that's the reason go is here. But I think interestingly, the idea of go also shows that you're part of like a new, the way it's used by Abraham, you're part of like a new mission. And over here, it could be that parallel that you're part of a new mission. And I think it shows them in John where it's somewhat more out of place, would probably be the strongest example of it when we heal the royal official's son. Go, your son will live. So again, it almost like go back and see. Yeah. Okay. So
Thank you.
so there's different. So I think the question is not only how miracles take place, but the question is how does the mechanism work that this like how did he know this is going to work? Did Jesus just It works. So I wanted to share with you the idea of Nachmanides, Ramban. He has an idea of divine overflow of what we say in Hebrew, hashgacha pratis, which means like the way that the God rules the world for individuals. And I think in general, I don't want to speak for all Christians or Jews, but in general, people think who are religious folk that God rules the world kind of equally for everyone. God wants what's best for you. You could do bad things, but in general, that God has like a way that he runs the world. So the Ramban, he has this thing called hashgacha pratis, which is just like the way that individuals are treated, and he has this idea that not everyone receives the same what he calls divine overflow. Not everyone receives the same divine overflow from God. People who are more close to God will receive more of that divine overflow. And what's interesting about the way he explains it is that a lot of times we think of reward and punishment in the afterlife, or even God will punish in this world. He doesn't view as reward and punishment as separate entities from the way that you're living your life. And I think this probably will help us understand this. When you do commandments or when you're close with God intellectually through cognition, you are living a different life, and the overflow of God will rule your life more so and give you more opportunities, because that is the closeness. The reward that you get for doing good is that closeness. Similarly, if you do sins and you don't have a normal cognition of God, then you're automatically separate from God. So what's interesting about this is that he would argue that a person who is specifically close to God would maybe be able to do miracles automatically, not as a reward, not as a punishment, not as a miracle, but as a natural process of the way to show that he's close. And it could be that, at least if we take that understand to understand this, that the people who, when Jesus says, let it be done for you according to your reason, according to your belief, according to your faith, what he's saying is that according to the level of your belief, that is how much it will be done. So a person where Jesus is already giving the highest praise to the centurion, he's saying you have the highest belief, not only that he was able to explain the way the authority works, but if you look also in the story of Luke, you see that he has lots of positive traits. So because he's at the highest level, it's not Jesus healing this guy at all. Jesus has nothing to do with the healing, if you read
It,
close.
yeah, tell me
And to
more.
the centurion, Jesus said, go, let it be done for you according to your faith. In other words, that if it is that you have the highest level faith, then a natural response is that the world will cater to your needs, because you'll be able to access the world in a magical, miraculous, divine overflow way. And therefore, Jesus is saying, you go, you accomplish this. Jesus is only, just like the centurion made Jesus aware that he can act from afar, Jesus is making the centurion aware that if he has the highest faith, the world will bend to him. So this is a very interesting way. It could be, I just want to note that we can't say that Jesus has no part in this. It could be that you need a Jesus figure to be around in order to kind of tap into this. It could be Jesus playing some form of the mechanics of the metaphysics in order to accomplish this. But there's no doubt when you read this that Jesus wants the centurion to know the healing will not be by Jesus alone. The
So,
healing will be done
yeah.
by the faith, the belief of the centurion.
So, okay, so it sounds like the centurion's faith is what defines is a is a primary force behind this healing. And we mentioned that you mentioned that he had the most highest level of the highest level of faith, or the most high, or you know the most amount of faith, the highest level of faith. How do you how is faith categorized? So what's so like, is it a scale?
Again, like I don't know the answer to that. All I could say is that you're part of the kingdom of heaven. You have the light. You keep away from the darkness. You believe with Jesus with all your heart. The way that Matthew sees it is that it's kind of obvious. A person who is not bogged down by the individual needs, a person is able to see things clearly. These things are somewhat they almost feel like metaphors, because it's unclear. And I would say that the New Testament never defines it as much as describes it. it doesn't give us a definition of here's what it means to be in the kingdom of heaven. Here's what it means to be in Jesus. And let's be honest, the people who believed in Jesus didn't really believe 100% according to at least the way the New Testament frames it. So it's one of those things that it's very hard to define. But for whatever reason, the centurion met the litmus test. He was high enough on the test that Jesus felt confident saying that according to your faith. Because this is the two elements. So go, if Jesus wanted just to say, that I learned the message of the centurion and I have authority, he should have said, go and stop there. If Jesus wanted to say it was completely based on the authority of the centurion, he should have said, let it be done for you according to your faith. I think that we having both those elements, the authority of Jesus is being invoked. And because of that, the centurion's faith is enough to put the slave or, the payas, the son, the child, whatever he is, over the threshold in order to be healed.
Rabbi, isn't that very subversive? I mean, just think about this for a minute, right? Essentially, he's non-Jewish, probably a pagan, worships a pagan or something along those lines. And he shows up in this one instance saying, Lord, heal me. And if Jesus is placing him at the most highest pedestal, isn't that subversive to get into how to, to
I don't think it's subversive for Matthew. I think Matthew, as we've spoken many times, has a positive attitude or a negative attitude towards a lot of Jews who aren't believers. Throughout we see this. So I think the fact that we have a centurion doing this, and it's hard to understand how a centurion's even there before 44, as we mentioned. Romans didn't have soldiers there. This maybe would have been Herod Agrippus's who knows where the centurion's coming from. And I think the idea is that this is specifically a non-Jew. So I don't know if subversive as much as critical of the
okay.
Jewish people that are floating around there. And I think one thing that I keep wanting to do as we speak about this is I noted for you at the start of the Centurion Servant that it's kind of weird that there's four stories. For me, when I'm an editor of a book, when
Mm.
I'm trying to write a gospel, we have three. And I think that we actually at least could see the crescendo of this story now, where we had the healing of the leper. My conclusion was simply that it was authority. He needed to just Jesus show himself as a priest, and he was able to heal him as defined by the community. Not necessarily a full healing, but defined by the community. Second story, now we have Jesus is more of an authority, but still doesn't heal. He's healing with someone. So the first story is not a real heal, but a joining the community. The second one is healing with someone. And what we're going to see in the healing of Peter's mother-in-law, our next story, and then the story 2 verses after the sick healing at dinner, Jesus is more and more becoming this powerful healer. It's almost this coming to fruition of who he is as a healer. The first story is a weak healing. The second story is a partnership healing. The healing of Peter's mother-in-law, it's healing with a touch. And the last one is healing of words. It shows that Jesus is almost his power of healing is increasing with each story. So I think the reason that we don't have three and have four because we actually wanted to make each of um those four additions, those four risings of Jesus' power to note that. Yeah.
Thank
So
you. So, okay, one last question. So, do you think the author of Matthew was anti-Semitic if he didn't put,
no, no, definitely not. The first person to be critical of Jews ought to be a Jew. I think it's definitely not anti-Semitic, but I think, if you go to synagogue on Yom Kippur, you'll hear people saying, it's time to repent. You can't live your life like this. It's unacceptable. You have to cry out and you should feel like trash. It's unacceptable you live like so I imagine if a random person heard what the Jews are saying on Yom Kippur and heard the speeches and the criticisms by the rabbi, it might be feel as anti-Semitic unless it's like a parent trying to help the child grow. So I think anti-Semitism, which we could give a formal definition if you want. But in general, I'd say he's not being anti-Semitic, but there are anti-Semitic overtones and undertones in Matthew, which I think would not have been understood by the community that time, which over time 100% were used as anti-Semitic overtones. And I think even in the story, which we know that we have one, where we read, was it 2 verses ago? I tell you, many will come east and west, and will eat with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown out into outer darkness. So what he's saying there is, it's not automatic. Just because you're born a Jew, just because you're born, you still have to earn it. But another way to read that anti-Semitically would say, the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown out into outer darkness. So if you read it as an opportunity for growth, it's an inspirational. If you read it as an objective criticism, it's
Mm.
anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just do the last line. And the servant was healed in that hour. So interesting. In that hour, I would have preferred if it said he was healed immediately. I read this as the servant was healed because it took a couple seconds to get back to the house.
I think
They
it
want
says
to show it's
so.
pretty quick. In the
So,
other, yeah, in the other
Rabbi,
story, it shows that it's pretty quick, but yeah.
so my version says, and the servant was healed at that very moment.
Okay. So here, I'll look at Bible Hub really quickly. We'll see at that very moment, at the same hour, at the very moment, at the very moment, at the very hour, that self same hour, that same hour, that very moment. Okay, so it's ambiguous at the very least. So it's either right away or not. But in any case, it happens very quickly, which is very parallel to the other stories where we see in Luke in 7:10, when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. So it did take a couple seconds for him to get back to the house, but he might have been healed right away. Similarly with John 4:40, 4:54. Then the father realized that this was the exact time which Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." So he and his whole household believed. So is that very second? The point is over here, either close or instantaneous healing, that it wasn't an accident. And I think that it's important for us to note that it's that happened so quickly. Okay.
Rabbi, I love his thoughts on Go. It's a
Oh my
powerful
God,
word,
the
Go.
Humble Leibowitz has a whole class on Go. I could probably find it for you if I want.
Let it be done for you as you have believed. And so he's saying is, the magic is does not, again, either with thinking or conduct, it doesn't matter. That magic can still happen. At least that's what he's saying over here. As in, he is co-healing along with the centurion, that he has power. That do you think that the same thing can apply to all of us, or the model you put forth where what you're saying is
Very
Jesus.
difficult to do what you're talking about. So one of the things that I'm adamant about, I'll put Christianity aside and talk about Judaism. People a lot of times will look to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob or stories in the Bible and say, well, that's how things work. And I'll note that that is not how things work. That is how things worked according to the Bible. And at least according to Judaism, there's dozens of Talmudic texts that say God ceased to act that way, what we call in Hebrew hester panim, the hiding of the face, that God has different relationships with different people, different generations, different abilities. Judaism does not believe that we live in a miraculous time anymore. Judaism does not believe we live in a prophetic time anymore. Judaism does not believe that we live in a time when people have a strong desire for idolatry. Judaism believes that all those things were once the case, and for whatever reason, those things are not the case anymore. So I find it absolutely disastrous when people try to emulate the miracles, actions, processes of the old and expect the same conclusions, because the Bible is very clear that the world doesn't work this way, and definitely rabbinic tradition is very clear that the world doesn't work this way. And it's interesting. This is one of the hallmarks of each religion. Judaism comes along and says this is how religion works. And then Christianity comes along and says this is how religion works. And then Islam comes along and says this is how religion works. And then Baha'i comes along and says this is how... So each religion kind of tries to say, like, that's maybe how it was, and I respect that, but here's the new way that religion works. And then Islam comes and say, I respect that Jesus was a prophet and Mary was important, but this is actually the way that religion works. And then later religions come. And so each time, each generation of humanity is trying to understand their relationship to the invisible, and it's very difficult. So there's no doubt that Christianity and first century Judaism believed in miracles, and they believed in instantaneous healing as one. I'll be honest, like For me, heal like I'd be much more impressed a chest of gold falls from heaven. To say he's healed, to say he's healed, that's almost like, yeah, okay, great. He's healed. Uh, so I found the miracles are within their historical context. This is a cultural, historical miracle that would make sense to these people. And, he doesn't make an arm grow back. He makes something that like you kind of have to suspend what you know about the world a little bit. But sometimes people are healed. Let's say someone's a leper, is not a leper, or she's lying in bed, dying with fever, and people get healed. So all these things, the miracles are almost minimal miracles, right? I mean, being paralyzed is pretty bad, but it's kind of saying there was something invisible that took place that Jesus did. And if you want, you cannot believe that. You can always say it's an accent. You can always say, I know it happened that moment, but the odds are it shouldn't happen, but it happened. So I think it gives the disbelievers, the unbelievers, a chance to say, is that really Jesus? Did that she had a fever? People get healed from fevers. People are paralyzed, or people can't walk, and then sometimes they walk in. So I feel that these miracles are always in a way that gives a little hole, a little opening for disbelief. And I think that's very apropos. And I think if someone has head cut off and it grows back a new head, like that's not the kind of miracles that we're going to see in the New Testament.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
call it a day.
That note, Rabbi, thank you.
No problem. Goodbye.